Hi everyone, you're very welcome to this year's virtual literary lunch event, which was due to take place here in Oranmore Castle. And I thought, seeing as it's less than 2 kilometres from my house, that I would record my own intros here at the castle itself. Before I begin, I just want to say that we as a festival committee have been very aware of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, not only on our own festival, but on the Darkness into Light event, which was due to take place in the small hours of Saturday morning over the same weekend as our festival. Pieta House do sterling work throughout the year, and the Darkness into Light event is their flagship fundraiser. So if, like me, you were going to be getting up in the early hours of Saturday morning and do the walk, and you're in a position to do so, please donate what you can to this great cause. And now, on to the writers. Our first writer, Michelle Coyne, I met her while attending a writing course in Galway City in 2013. It was a Tuesday night, if I remember correctly, in a small, damp Portakabin at the rear of Galway Technical Institute. And I have to be honest, as the weeks went on, it was always a pleasure to hear Michelle read what she had written the previous week. Michelle had a way of transporting us from those cold, wintry nights in Galway City to another place entirely, and a time that she had forged in her own imagination. It is a pleasure to welcome Michelle Coyne to our literary lunch.
Hello, my name is Michelle Coyne. I'm going to read an excerpt from my short story, Magnetic. We met before I was tired. It was at an exhibition in that gallery on Dominic Street, the one with the white maritime paint and deckboard floors, with those panel windows that face across the street to more modern windows gazing heartsick back. The exhibition was food themed and artfully wrong. You were invited to taste things straight after reading menu card descriptions that put a hop in your throat. The challenging swallow of heron neck, jellyfish noodles, brutalist ice cream and 14 allergen layer cake. Back then I'd go places on my own just to notice stuff, gathering texture for the paintings I'd make on weekend mornings in the damp brick shed behind the house. So I was standing there in the gallery like a boy untethered when a bearded man in a black apron came along, poured a shot from a bottle and placed the cold glass in my fingers. He poured another and handed it to someone behind me saying, "Have a try of that." And from over my shoulder in a cedar-warm voice, Gael said, "What is it?" I turned to see him, the first time I ever saw him. He was stupidly beautiful. There against the white gallery walls he looked like a saint in an old oil painting, one who might before long be expiring in religious ecstasy. Some of the liquor had spilled down over his fingers and I thought about sucking them clean. I turned back to the man in the apron, pleased with the privacy of my thought, and he passed me the bottle so I could read its label. Ní a nocht. I laughed and Gael stood next to me. "What does it mean?" It's in Irish. It means not tonight. "It'll knock the horn off you for a week," the man in the apron said as he went away from us. "But is it alcohol?" Gael asked. "I think so," I said, and took a quick whiff of my glass. "Yes, definitely." He leaned in to read the small print, and I read it with him, with the cashmere sleeve of his jumper making soft static at my bare shoulder. Made with Mashua Borovica, a South American tuber the Inca used to stop their warriors thinking about sex when they went into battle. Gael looked at me, held up his glass, his fingers still slick with liquor. "Do you want to?" "Yes," I said, though maybe in answer to another unasked question, and tilted the shot to my lips. I watched Gael watch me, his own glass slowly draining, and felt the languid burn of the alcohol fan inside my chest. We left together, or at the same time at least. I kept expecting him to make some excuse and head off in a different direction, but he didn't. He stayed with me as I wandered the grubby streets of late summer, hanging baskets gone leggy and the canal soup thick with algae. Into a spell of intense silence, where I thought I was surely losing him, I threw, "And how long have you been in Galway?" He blinked, coming back to me. My blood went hot with relief. "It will be 4 years this autumn," he said. "Was it for work or—" "No, it was a holiday. I was due to stay for 1 week, but then I didn't leave. I think it felt like home for me here." "God, that's highly Spanish." In what way do you mean? The Armada, you know, they stopped here. They stopped off in Galway. And lots of them wouldn't go back on the ships. Ah, yes, I remember. There is the Spanish Arch, of course. And you can see it too, if you look hard enough. Lots of dark-haired, dark-eyed Galwegians. Your lads really left their mark on us. And you? Me? What about me? He stood in my path and took a lock of my red blonde hair between two careful fingers. This is not very Spanish. He was grinning, and the heat of his wrist by my jaw made me want to feel his pulse hop under my tongue. Oh, well, I come from a long line of very stubborn women. We ended up on Grattan Road, down on the beach, and after the sun had gone in and the moon had risen plump and yellow over the tender hills at the far side of the bay, I waded in up to my knees while Gael stood waiting on the sand. We should go for a swim, I said, throwing my hands up to the moonlight as it came slinking across the water, my shins tingling from the Atlantic cold. I am not a swimmer, he said, and I turned to him. You can't swim. I know how, but I don't, at least not in Ireland. Madness, I said, wading back to him, the dipped ends of my skirt clinging to my knees. Why not? He took my cool hand in his warm one, and my skin fizzed with a thrill of the difference. It is much too cold for me. I think I would die. I smiled, squeezed his hand. Actually die? Yes, most likely. He was beautiful, washed in yellow moonlight, his brow serious and studying, as he brought his hand to my face, pressed a gentle thumb to my cheek. And I knew he was going to kiss me, though I didn't really believe it. Even when it was actually happening, with my toes sinking into the cool night sand, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe my luck. He invited me back to his stuffy flat, where I let him exhaust me on the sofa next to a silently flickering electric fire. And in his final moment, when he threw his head back, the firelight shining darkly on his face, he looked just as I'd pictured him the moment I met him, the dying saint, but better because his lips were making a prayer of my name. And the way he said it, Delma, with a D so soft it got lost somewhere between an S and a TH. Gael still likes to talk about the liquor we drank in the gallery that day, how they must have messed up the formula, because for him it had the opposite effect. After he drank it, sex was all he could think about. I used to agree. I used to say that the effect was long-lasting, as I pinned him to the bed and made him late for work. I used to agree, until I couldn't remember how to paint, until I got tired. Now, almost 2 years on, the earth tilts and settles as I heave myself out of a hired car in front of a remote Icelandic hotel. A weekend away to mark our anniversary. His idea. I'm minutes awake, fetched from the forest of some dream by Gael's hand coming warm to my waist. I slept the entire drive here, saw nothing of the landscape or the sky, a full 5 hours from Reykjavik, and still I'm shattered. I feel like that little toy giraffe I had when I was small, elastic threaded up through his hollow limbs, and when I'd press the round button underneath his stand, he'd collapse. For years I hardly thought of him, but now he comes to me regularly, and the careless way I'd make him fall and stand. I look to Gael sliding the cases from the boot, and it takes me a second to notice the mountain behind him. But once I do, I can't understand how I didn't before. It's immense, darker, blacker than the other mountains around it. Its surface is all ruptures and bulges from the madness that created it, the shaking and lava and fire. There's a glacier wedged on top that has a little curl of ice jutting up at its peak, like a buried woman's finger beckoning the sky. It's impressive, Gael says, pulling our cases towards me, their wheels rattling on paving stones. No? Yeah, I say, although it's not the right word. There must be one somewhere between it and terrifying. Magnetic, maybe. Gael passes me and carries the cases into the lobby. I follow him, glance back at the mountain as I go inside, feeling a strange wash of relief when it's still there, like it might have shimmered to nothing while my back was turned. Inside, a wooden staircase winds to the floors above, with a reception desk nestled in its crook. Gael approaches the open-faced woman seated behind it, and I slouch into the next room where coals glow in a two-mouthed fireplace. The place is crammed with red velvet chairs and sofas that invite me to sit, to splay my limbs across them and to sink. I think about it, and then I think about the struggle to get up again if I do. So I drag my gaze instead to the windows overlooking the grounds behind the hotel and the ocean beyond. Rough grey hills sawtooth along the peninsula like monstrous cresting waves, ready to crash down and wipe us all out. The sea, the real sea, roils at their feet, blasted by gusts that don't seem to make it ashore. The grass just outside the window is shudderingly still. I imagine the mountain behind me having the same view. But in the foreground there's this tiny white hotel, with even tinier people cowering inside. A few years ago I would have been able to work this mild terror onto a canvas, excise it from my body with a palette knife and brush. But it's getting harder now to remember what that was like, how it used to feel. Delma, Gael says, standing at the threshold, I'm afraid there is no lift. Oh, I say, looking out past him to the staircase. It's so steep I'll probably have to sleep again straight away after I climb it. But, he says, they will have dinner starting in 10 minutes, so I will take our bags up and be back. Okay, I say, and watch him stride off, carrying the cases up with irritating ease. I swallow my envy and go to finger the promotional flyers next to the reception desk while I wait for him. Aurora tours, whale watching, museums, hot springs. 4x4 glacier treks and ice cave tours, one says, and there's a photo of a group of people in matching blue snowsuits posing beneath that great icy finger on top of the mountain outside. Behind them is the topaz blue entrance to an ice cave. I flip the flyer open, and the words "Journey to the Centre of the Earth" streak whitely across the top. Snug amongst the columns of text there's a photo of the mountain that, from the angle, must have been taken right outside this hotel. Now, Gael says, so suddenly next to me that I snap the flyer shut and post it back into its slot on the rack. Ready? That's it. Thank you very much.
When I first contacted our next writer, Paul McMahon, who was based in Clonakilty, about appearing at our literary lunch, he was quick to tell me that though he was keen to attend the event, he had a lot going on with some house renovations and the imminent arrival of his second child. And in between cancelling our actual event and rearranging this virtual one, the second child has arrived, and I'm sure there's a little part of Paul that's thankful that he doesn't have to travel to Oranmore at this busy time in his life. So we're pleased to welcome Paul McMahon to our literary lunch.
It's a real honour and pleasure to be given a reading here for Oranmore Literary Festival. Thanks to Marcus. Hope you enjoyed the reading. First poem called Milltown Cemetery, Belfast, March 16th, 1988. The last of the 3 coffins had just been lowered when the first grenade exploded. I was blown 12 feet away, yet landed on my back unhurt. Over the PA, a voice called out to get down. The crowd of mourners and journalists scattered. Some were gathering themselves from grave plots, underwater nails booming in the deep of their heads. A woman was carried past, her face masked in blood. Another grenade exploded. Pistol shots rang out, and an overweight man with black fuzzy hair and a thin beard appeared out in front of the crowd, holding a 9mm Browning pistol in his right hand. He then raised both hands triumphantly up into the air, one fisted, one bepistoled, inciting the crowd to come on. His mouth muted by the din, fish gasped inaudible insults as he produced another grenade and lobbed it into the air. The sea of people parted as it sank, and the dull sound of the explosion lifted a cloud of dust into the overcast sky. Film crews lay spread-eagled behind gravestones. Women were screaming, men were shouting, the gunman was smiling. He then began firing in a steady line across the crowd from his left, causing a sweeping domino effect like a Mexican wave. As one by one the mourners ducked behind the headstones, I waited, then ducked as he levelled his pistol at me. I held my face to the inscription on someone's headstone, their life surmised into 2 monumental dates, as the wave fell away to my left with the gunshots tracing its fatal arc after the falling crest. Before I stood up, I stole a glance over the headstone. The gunman had turned and was running towards the motorway, where a white RUC van was parked on the grass verge. A large group of people chased after him, hers bolting after the greyhound. The gunman stopped to turn and fire. The people chasing him dodged bullets like boxers, weaving fists. The RUC van drove off, with no bullets left, no grenades. Exhausted, the gunman ran onto the deserted motorway, chased by 3 angry men. At the graveside, film crews scrambled out from behind their protective tombstones, cameras rolling, frantic for interviews. A tall, blonde presenter for the BBC, with her microphone held out like a pistol, turned to me and demanded, "What did you see?" As I turned away, I told her what anyone from there in those days would say. I saw nothing. This next poem is called The Burial of 10-2 Blue. No one looks for the dead among the dead. That was the solution. So I waited until it got dark, and when I found the lidded over grave the grave diggers dug earlier, I began digging. Hear nothing, I told myself. Not the night birds, not your own breathing. Nothing till the spade hits wood. In this silent darkness I was a giant. The shoulder of the spade was a rooftop, my foot crushing it down through eaves as the blade pressed into the clay. When I climbed out from the turmeric soil, I dragged 10-2 Blue's bony corpse to the edge and dropped him under the closed lid of the coffin, then refilled the grave and padded the barrow down as the grave diggers had left it that morning. Before leaving the graveside, I paused to gather my breath. The grave tops looked like the rooftops of a steepled holy city. Grave crosses rising up from 100 churches, whose bell towers were the hilted handles of knives, the blades driven down into the starved ribs of cobbled streets. As I looked over the city of the dead, I felt myself rise, exalted, a holy man at the edge of a defeated desert, returning to bowed disbelievers. I flung the spade into the gaping dark. It whirled through the captured air like the wings of rooks in the belfry, and I walked towards the horseshoe gateway, with the great tidal hum of the universe washing over me. This next poem is about getting involved with something before you know what you're getting involved with. It's called The Pups in the Bog Hole. I poured the milk into the cup of hot black tea until the surface clouded over and lightened with coils of steam, like the genie of memory rising out from the uncorked bottle of the forgotten. The turf-brown tea settled at the brim of the cup, as silent as the guilty bog water that brimmed the wide bog hole I had walked away from many years ago when I was a child. It was a deep bog hole, a blind eye, beside a bare oak tree whose branches, like exposed nerve endings, signposted its fatal spot in the middle of the vast gouged-out turf fields. As I returned that day to Uncle Frank's pub on the sea road, through the coconut scent of the yellow wind bushes, the palms of my hands were still stinging, reddened, branded by the weight and the coarse fabric of the turf sack. And all around was the echoing liquid call of the curlew, marking out the hollow tent of the sky, the amphitheatre that had been listening all along to the puppy yelps muffled in the turf sack, and my footsteps dragging them to the bog hole. The mute colosseum of the firmament gasped as the tossed sack whirred through the air, hit the bull's eye of the bog hole, bobbed, seemed to float, then slowly sank. As I turned and fled, my footsteps were lighter, but the naivety of my bravery weighed down my outsized Wellington boots with a heavier tread. In my pocket was the 50-pence piece, the Judas coin, Uncle Frank had given me to do the man's job he didn't have time to do. And overhead, the crowded audience of the sky darkened in disbelief. As I sit here years later and lift the teacup to my lips, I realise I have been bringing sacks to that bog hole ever since. The pups of what I cannot reveal to anyone, pushing the visage of their key of art paws out through the sacking. And in my ear I can still hear Uncle Frank's well-greased till shoot open like a bullet and hit home with a ring. And I still see, beside the bog hole, on that wizened trunk of that burnt oak tree, the eye of a twisted knot stirring out like the drowned. And this next last poem is called Tom's Pouch of Cure Stones. Tom's Pouch of Cure Stones. When Tom was still alive, I would often see him looking up to the sky while standing out in the field at the back of his farmhouse. And when I had the chance to ask him one day in the local what he was looking at, Tom took a black felt pouch out from his pocket and handed it to me. They fell from the sky, he said, cure stones for curing elf shot in cows, when the cow starts to pine away for no reason, hit by the fairies, the old folks say. As I clutched the clutch of hidden stones and went to untie the pouch's lace, he told me the pouch must never be opened, nor can the stones ever be looked upon or counted. The pouch of cure stones was given to him by his father, as were the words of the cure, he said, as I turned the concealed cure stones within the palm of my hand. The stones were round and smooth, the size of marbles. Blind eyes kept in the dark from where they see into the sickness of the cow. The pouches passed over the cow's back in the sign of the cross, Tom explained, while reaching his blue-veined hand out to bless the air. And I imagined him at the afflicted animal's side, caressing the top of its head with one hand, the other hand blessing the pouch over its back, the braille of stones praying in through the animal's hide, as Tom whispers the words of the cure into the felt conch of the cow's ear, an incanted bovine language handed down from the wind that blows the slow dreams of trees into the ghost birds who haunt the fallen autumn leaves. When I suggested to Tom the stones may have been coughed up from the smoothing gall of a seagull's bladder whilst flying high overhead, he just smiled, as the wise are known to do when mocked by the foolish. And when I gave Tom his pouch of cure stones back, he returned it to his pocket and stood to go, The stones were needed, he said, by a neighbour's cow. Although Tom passed away many years ago, I've heard some people still see him, standing out there in the middle of the same field at the back of his now derelict roofless farmhouse, looking up at the sky, they say, while quickly raising his right hand up above his head. I just smile when people wonder at what he might be doing, as I know that Tom must have finally untied the lace on his pouch, and one by one he is throwing his clutch of ghost stones back up into the sky. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the festival. Bye-bye.
Our next reader, Demi, who's based in Berlin, contacted me late in 2019 to say that she was planning a trip to Ireland in April or May of 2020. Demi had appeared at the last year's Literary Lunch event and told me that, other than performing, she was keen to teach writing workshops. So I put Demi in touch with the Calasantis College, located a mere stone's throw from Oranmore Castle, with the ultimate view of having her workshop participants play a part in the overall Literary Lunch event. Well, as we all know, COVID-19 had other plans for Demi, and all of us, but here she is reading in what sounds like the most beautiful courtyard in the whole of Berlin. Please welcome Demi.
This is called Ode to German Sommersprossen. Sommersprossen means freckles. Sommersprossen, lieblich, German ribbons into eardrums like a finger, circles around a thumb like a tongue licking salt from the glass. Not a beautiful language. I disagree. German children sound like school bells with their fluttering enthusiasm, teeth melodies, crystal high notes. German is something between metal and driftwood, strict but irregular, and porous if you allow your eyes and ears and mouth to approach. If you don't understand this, how can we begin to move forward? And how will I bear to move out to let this language, my second brain, atrophy and die? No Späti, Schatz, nor Stein, Barzahlen, Glückwünsche. There will be nights in England and America when I am asked to speak, bring the accent out, to trot along the garden path. What an unusual language. What an ugly skill. What a big forehead you have. How boring, how limited this English. Not my mother's tongue, nor my father's, but the one pressed down to them. They held out open, sweaty hands. Berlin geboren. There's no good word for Wege, Wackelig, or Schade. Schaden. I will miss your shades on my lips and your crackling in my throat. I will try to be both, but miss being beide. I will forget the Unterricht, German for losers. Schade for fear is not the reason to stay, it is often the sign to go. So, jetzt, hüpf draußen, mit deinen schönen Sommersprossen. Wherever zu Hause, you will always be my home. I hope you're all having a beautiful day in Oranmore or wherever you're watching this from. I really wish that I could be there with you in person, but I'm happy that I can at least send this dispatch from my courtyard in Berlin. This is a poem I wrote last summer, and I think it captures a feeling of this kind of loneliness and isolation we're all feeling that is very relevant right now, even though it wasn't written during this time. It's called Feel Free. Stand close to the oven so your bare legs soak up the last of the warmth where you just cooked salmon in butter and salt. 3 portions to scarf down between shifts at the vegan donut shop, 3 afternoons per week, shyly lowering your eyes when each colleague asks the inevitable questions. First time in gastro, American, 27. What did you do before here? But are you vegan too? Vegetarian at least? Feel the heat on this, your day off, your nothing day, your day of silence. No one knowing where you are, no one caring to find out. Glory in warmth blossoming over pale skin, and just try to remember it is okay to be alone here on this street, whose name you can't pronounce, to sink your teeth. Feel free. So more, I cannot bear to move you away. How can a handful of scenes across 2 months, a summer, seem like an etching stone? Your side and mine make the bed, dirty towels strung above French doors and your eyes shut. Moonchild, dead to the sun until 3 p.m. or 4. Sleep while I read your books and tan legs on the balcony, suspended among trees, peeling paint, glass bottles, and ash. I count pages like petals. He loves me. He loves me. He just hasn't realized it yet. Count off days until fall, pages, petals, leaves falling, chest falling, crest fallen. Count domestic scenes in memory. Didn't that happen? Didn't it count for something? Count whiskeys, bruised toes, secrets, and perfume samples. My naivete sprawls bright and green, and though I know the truth, know the season is ending, I stay a little longer in your rusty chair. Thumb the pages, waiting for you to wake and see I am not there. In bed, to raise your head, squint against sunlight, smile at each other across the room. You will take me in for this long moment then, and I'll long to know, but never learn. What do you think of me? Pale in the sun, reading books on your balcony before your eyes close and you fall heavy again into moods. This is a poem that actually will be in this year's edition of Ropes, which is in Galway, as you all probably know, and probably many of you are involved in as well as writers. It's called In the Telling of It. My Tinder date says he's a storyteller. He's an actor. I'll never learn. He hasn't heard of James Joyce, but thinks he's read Finnegan's Wake once or twice. Yeah, that one sounds familiar. Between knee touches and bragging about his time in the military, he tells me I have feline features and then that he's allergic to cats. He reminds me of a boy I loved who called me honey, who felt persecuted by bees. Months later, in a Dublin cafe, I look up to find Joyce's bespectacled face bearing down from all sides. And I wonder where my love for Joyce began. I suppose the answer is in pages burning, pages alight, words of phosphorus strike, ash sky, incandescent army, a river, a flood. Water in my hands, pulp between fingers, a language that refuses to stay still. Joyce didn't care much for convention. So much so, Ulysses' printer stepped in, refusing to reset type after the 3rd or 5th rewrite. Unusual language. Language easily grown, quickly rotting. Gift given. My gifts to the boy included sad stories, nights sitting on a bench outside the church, and a poem, handwritten, torn carefully from my green notebook. His to me, the reason behind his car accident, the falling out with his family. You can't tell anyone. So I hold it inside until I feel ugly, swollen like a balloon, until he is gone and something in me goes too, stillborn and ending, but not a proper goodbye. Joyce knew love dies on the page, that the real love is in the telling of it, the sanctity of tongues, an intricate dance of risk and mercy, yours and mine. I never told anyone. Love died when you stopped saying what you wanted. And now all's left is that unsaid, unfinished words go on falling, gently, gently falling between us, the untold story stinging in my head. Did you hear about Mom? Did you hear about the time Mom danced all night in Prague? She was in love with a saxophone player, and by proxy, all saxophone players. Jazz made her feel alive and warm even as the snow fell on cobbled roads and she and Paulina left faint trails with their boots on wet stones. There's a video, you know the one. Mom struts through the empty street, sheds her gloves, throws her raincoat to the floor. There are more. 35mm scans from the trip to Lanzarote where she slept in a blood-red yurt. Feeling the color would soothe her yearning heart and hiked across black rocks while waves crashed, her mustard dress flapping wild, white Adidas ash-caked. The route brought her to a lava cave, lavish and romantic, where she ate alone and listened to, you guessed it, saxophone. There are photos from home, velvet coat and orange scarf draped just so, clearly hung over in last night's patent leather shoes. Full of style, the year she worked for the fast fashion conglomerate and nearly stayed on just to stock her wardrobe, the year she almost killed herself. Ideating, calculating force, F equals m times a, where m is mass and a acceleration of trams and trains and small German automobiles. She was glad she hadn't killed herself. The night she met the guy who looked like David Bowie with decent coke and a perfect body and a grin she swears to God would make the Sahara Desert wet. There aren't pictures of that, but there's a film from Mom's first trip to Italy. She's on the back of Aunt Lisa's Vespa, hair flying and helmet shiny pink. Mom was glad then she hadn't jumped in front of the train in Milan. Mom was glad a lot. Even in her Laurie Anderson, post-Lou Reed melancholy, her splintered phone screen days, her delayed flights in summer lakeside, breakup despair, truth-searching, lobster-red sunburn, blame it on the mushrooms days. Mom was glad at Schloss Schönbrunn to have no one else to care for, to stroll the grounds at her leisure, to wear a red beret. And in Venice, to celebrate her own birth without witness, to celebrate by crying in cathedrals and smiling at the boats. Mom trusted strangers and floated through house parties and often chose to walk the last blocks home, to talk to herself, to commit to memory. Mom did a lot of things you wouldn't believe. Thought a lot of thoughts she wouldn't dare repeat. But she did write it all down. This is a relatively new poem, but I wrote it this month as part of a daily poetry writing challenge for National Poetry Month, and it was inspired actually by looking into this courtyard from my window, which is up there, and seeing everything starting to bloom as spring has returned. And how this year, because of everything that's going on, I'm paying attention to spring in a very different way. It's called Suddenly Birds. For the first time, I can tell you the exact date the buds blossomed. The first time I was paying attention, aware of how unaware I have been, apathetic towards the natural order of things. It's been a week and the trees in the courtyard are already full of flowers, bustling, yellowish green, reflecting light so sharply it hurts to look at them for too long. Tears come sometimes for the brightness and for the birds who have suddenly returned home and flit like stars might, given the chance to wander. Make new homes, delight from every angle, constellate. In this time where nothing is happening, there's always something to see in the garden, and I'm grateful for every reminder that some things never change. Worlds whir fast and slow, and others go on in their rhythm, thrilled to be bobbing on a tree, examining every angle of the branch.
I met Gerard O'Brien at the very first Oranmore Arts Festival in 2018. It was in Armorica restaurant during the art exhibition in which his wife was exhibiting. And I'm not too sure how the conversation got onto writing, but I happened to mention to Gerard that I had something published in Rope's Literary Journal, which is published annually by the MA in Literary and Publishing at NUI Galway, to which Gerard responded humbly, "Oh, I founded Rope's." And I suppose in another non-COVID-19 world, I would have made much more of the Ropes connection between each of the writers, and would have had some of the Ropes team present at the lunch. I would have made much more of the charity aspect of the journal, which each year picks a local charity to raise funds for. But that was all before the tiny little bug found life as we know it and ground it to a halt. So this year I'm just thankful to have 5 talented authors contributing to this event, and I'm delighted that Gerard O'Brien is amongst them.
Okay, hello everyone. Marcus asked me to talk about the origins of ropes. Seems to think that you might be interested. I suppose here we are. I had a look up in the attic and rummaged around through some very aggressive spiders and retrieved a bunch of early editions of ropes here. I've actually got 6 of the first 7 editions of ropes. Now, how did it start? I suppose it was back in the 90s, early 90s. We were all in the English department doing postgrads in English. Now, MAs in those days was by research. So you went along, you had an idea for research, you okayed it with the professor, and off you went, and that was it. So you wandered off through libraries and research areas and stuff like that, and you might return after 5, 6, 10, 20 years. People got lost in MAs. There was a chap I remember who spent 10 years working on Samuel Beckett, and he never finished. He never put pen to paper. He just got so paralysed by all that he had read that he could never actually get it finished, and that was pretty much, well, it wasn't the norm, but that was kind of an example of research MAs back in those days. For the most of us, we'd probably work between maybe 4 or 5 years. There would be a standard MA. Now, in the middle of all kind of this kind of thing, there was a chap called Gerard Barrett who went on afterwards to become. He went on to do a PhD in Oxford. Jerry and myself were having a chat one day. We were discussing this idea of how there was no focus for people to sort of publish their theses or sort of get people writing or anything like that. So we got this idea that we'd start a review of postgraduate studies where people doing postgrad work could publish in a magazine, in a university magazine, and it would give them a chance to see this stuff in print, give them a bit of a focus, and also to try to maybe get a bit of debate, a bit of feedback. I was particularly interested in that idea because I'm just interested in everything. So the idea of it was intended to be a whole arts faculty idea, that the idea that people from history and from geography and Irish and would all be kind of writing stuff and kind of cross fertilizing and kind of a whole interdisciplinary idea that really appealed to me. And actually I was really ambitious. I had an idea that we might get the sciences involved as well and get in even people writing papers on medicine, but that never quite came about. So anyway, so that was the kind of the original impetus to create this magazine. And that's where the title comes from. There's the first edition here. The title is a Review of Postgraduate Studies, which kind of it's kind of an acronym of ROPES. ROPES is an acronym of Review of Postgraduate Studies. So that's how it came about. We sort of had to look at the idea of funding. How could you fund it? We went to, first of all, we went to Kevin Barry, who was the professor of English at the time, and he was extremely supportive. And then we got on to all the heads of departments in the arts faculty, and each of them gave 200, the big departments, like English and history and so on, gave €200. And the smaller departments then, depending on their budgets, like a tiny department like the German department, they still gave €50, which was just quite generous. €50 was a lot of money back in 1993. So that's how we funded it. We kind of got everybody, all the different departments to fund the idea, and then we put out a call for papers. Now the other idea, of course, was that we weren't going to stop it at UCG as it was then. We wanted to get all the NUI colleges involved, and we put out calls for papers to all the other Irish universities. So we did get work in from other people as well. Interestingly, and probably slightly amusingly, UCD responded by going off and producing their own, it's called Pages, and it lasted one issue. So I suppose invitation is the sincerest form of flattery. So that was how we got it together. Now, because the technical nightmare of getting it together was just that, a nightmare. It's amazing looking back on how technology has moved on. For instance, there was no internet. There were no mobile phones. You had floppy disks if you wanted to transfer information from one computer to another. You had a floppy disk, which were terribly unreliable. And then, of course, all the computers didn't speak to one another. So if you were working on Apple and somebody had, say, a Commodore computer or something else, they wouldn't speak. You'd have to do conversions, and you convert a file from one system to another, and you might find that all the capital letters had become squares or something like that. So it would be, so there was an awful lot of work in having to go through the different formats and sort of reformat things into something that was coherent. So so you had this problem. And the other thing, like, you didn't have mobile phones. You wanted to contact somebody, you had to go down to a call box and call them, and it was just it was a nightmare, really. Just trying to get the whole thing together. But we did actually, we pulled it all together, and we brought out, as I said, the first issue was in the spring of 93, and we got, from the very beginning, we wanted to get the visual arts involved as well. So the idea was we'd get an artist to design each cover. So that's the first cover, is by Siobhan Piercy there, and so we got our first issue out, and the other thing about it was that it was originally going to be not just academia stuff. There was going to be creative writing in it as well, but we ran into a slight problem. There was a chap who used to lecture in the English department, a terribly nice fellow, really nice chap, who wrote novels and published them in the States. And he said, I'll give you a piece for the magazine. We said, oh great, delighted, And he gave it to us, and it was terrible. It was really awful. And we couldn't publish it, and we couldn't say no, because it was just, we were too close to him, really, I suppose. So we just hit on the idea that, look, what we'll do is we'll just stay with academic stuff, and we'll leave the creative stuff out for the time being. So that's how the first issue then was just purely academic stuff, and it was quite an esoteric sort of lot of stuff in it. Literature and guilt in the GDR, the novels of Frank McGinley, an interview with Jennifer Johnson, and 4 Irish apocryphal passions, and so on. So there was an interesting article on applying to American postgraduate studies, to American postgraduate colleges, word beasts and critical overs, structuralism, post-structuralism, and the science fiction of Samuel R. Delany. So that's the kind of stuff that was in it. Quite a mix of things. And the format that we did was, I don't know why we selected this kind of A4 size, but for the text then we didn't want to have a whole lot of text across the page, so we hit on this the idea of the column, so the 2 column to break up the page like that. That was really the first edition, and actually it occurs to me, I just noticed the fact that we had two people from Oranmore actually were involved in helping with the editing, a girl called Sheena Butterfield and a girl called Anne Mulhall, who went on to Oxford as well, I think, to do a PhD. So the first issue came out. I also noticed that originally we had the rather ambitious plan of bringing it out every quarter, but obviously I'd forgotten all about that, but by the time we got around to the second issue, I see that we saw sense, because the next one that came out was in the spring of '94. So the second issue followed along the same from the first issue. That's the second one. Cover design by Declan Holloway. The Pacification and Revenge Tragedy, Functionalism and Eliminativism, an archaeological survey of West Clare, and Postmodernism, John Balmville's Newton Letter. So that was kind of, they were the main features of the second edition. So there we go, that was the thing. And then the third edition followed on again from the first 2. It was actually interesting enough, I think it was Leonie King from Oranmore Castle who designed the cover for the third edition. Again, following on the same kind of format with Palatine migration to Ireland in the 18th century. This was the first issue, the first article. Tony Harrison's V. A guy called Manuel Portela. Actually, I think he was working in Portugal at the time. The Wuthering Heights and Coarse Language, postmodern aspects of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and so on. So they were kind of, again, so largely literary, some historical and so on. Now, to move on then to the 5th edition. The 5th edition, I don't have one. The 4th edition, here we are. It was Laura Becky Ford who did the cover for that one. Again, following on the format of largely academic stuff. I see Professor Joseph Lee actually had an article in there on De Valera. Now, I did the first 3, edited the first 3 editions. The 4th edition was a chap called John McAuliffe, who is a published poet. He's actually read in court, I think, a number of times, and he's now based in Manchester. He's from Tralee, I think, originally. Now, so John McAuliffe took over the reins of the thing, and being a creative writer himself, he was anxious kind of to bring the creative aspect back into the magazine. So he begins kind of cautiously with some book reviews. There was a review, James Mahon on Keith Hopper, and Carl Keegiff on Eamon Kelly's Frugal Comforts. So we had 2 tentative book reviews in with the rest of the academic stuff. There was Lee's piece, De Valera's Dreams of Ireland, and Traditionalism Bad, Modernism Good, Redefining Rurality in Ireland. the darkness within the macabre psyche in contemporary Irish fiction. I think the people in the English department were contributing most to the work, but stuff was coming in from outside. Now, the 5th edition, as I said, is missing, and then the 6th edition is the 6th edition here. Dean Kelly designed that. Dean Kelly now works in Kelly's. He designed the cover. And now we're moving into poetry. There's a lot of poetry in the 5th edition, with Rita Ann Higgins, Bev McGuckian, Thomas McCarthy, Rona Groark, Kerry Hardy, Patrick Galvin, Ava Burke, James Simmons, Louis Dupuer, Moya Cannon, Janice Fitzpatrick Simmons, Ian Kilroy, and Hugo Kelly. So a lot of poetry in there, but then the academic articles as well: Irish drama, Sing, Maud Gonne, literature of identity in the Caribbean and Central America, Northern Irish art, censorship, fiction, and the GDR, the Spanish Civil War and 1930s Ireland, Chartism and the Nation, Roman poetry, translation and the Irish state, and so on. So quite a mixture of academic articles, but a big chunk of poetry. So this is really where sort of issue 6, where it begins to migrate across to the more literary and the creative. And then the last issue that I have here is number 7. It was in 1999. Again, this one was edited by a girl called Karen van de Velde, and the work, again, it follows the mixture of academic stuff. We've even got illustrations in it at this stage. The mix follows the kind of literary and the academic. There's a brief history of thinking about the end of time by Dr. Conor McCarthy. Dublin's Fen de Cercle, Leisure, Life, Modernity, Vulgarity and Night Schools for Anglicisation. Biddy Jenkinson, Laura Vaughan on na Filiachta, so there was an Irish piece in there. And so on. And then the literary pieces, Patrick McCabe actually put a short story in there, Hot Nights at the Go-Go Lounge. Catherine Kerr, James Simmons, Med McGuckian, Fred Johnson, Thomas F. Costello, Eileen Nicola, Joan McBrien, Peter Flynn and Conor O'Callaghan, all poetry. And Nina Fitzpatrick, I don't know if anybody remembers Nina Fitzpatrick, one half of which was the late Patrick Sheeran, quite a character in his own right in the university. So there was a film script actually by Nina Fitzpatrick in that issue. So that's was the origins of Ropes, the first 7 issues, and it then kind of gradually migrated over to the creative writing course kind of came in, and it came in as part of the English Department of English. So I think it was John Kenny, I'm not sure, but I think it was John Kenny who was kind of instrumental in sort of, you know, using Ropes as a vehicle for, you know, the vehicle that it is now for creative writing, and as a mouthpiece for the creative writing course. So it sort of had moved across, as I said, kind of gradually, in steps, in stages, it moved across to a purely creative writing magazine, which is what it is now, and sort of established in its own right. So I suppose it's kind of gratifying to have been associated with the beginning of it, which was what 23 years ago, was it 27 years ago? So, you know, but that was just my part in the beginning of it. So it's still going, and that's that's where it came from. Okay, so that's it. Thank you for listening.
When I first contacted our next writer, Nuala O'Connor, she was quick to get back to me with 3 simple words in an email: count me in. And when organising events like this, it's always great to get a fast, positive response. Nuala is based just out the road in Oranmore, just out the road from Oranmore, sadly more than 5 kilometres. And she was one of the many writers to visit the MA in Writing in NUIG when I was doing my Masters in 2014. I remember Nuala talking about her agent in New York and how she might wake up to an email with 10 pages of suggestions of edits that the team had for her current draft in a novel she was working on at the time. It seemed worlds away from where I was with my writing, and probably still is. However, I'm delighted to welcome Nuala O'Connor to our literary lunch event at Oranmore Castle.
Hi, this is Nuala O'Connor here in my garden in Ballinasloe. You can hear the birds, you'll probably see some cats. Reading for Oranmore Arts Festival, and I'm going to read from a beautiful new Galway book. This is from Dura Press, and it's an anthology of short stories, one of the Galway 2020 projects. It's a beautiful anthology, and I have a story in here set in Ballinasloe, a Haskra, but mostly in Dublin. And actually the extract I'm going to read is set in Dublin because otherwise I have to do too much explaining about the Galway bits. But let it suffice to say that Maria, the main character, is from a Haskra and she does some shopping in Ballinasloe and she lives in Dublin at the moment. And she is a person who writes blurb for perfume. So if you've ever read the In-Flight magazine and read the perfume blurbs and thought this is absolute nonsense, that's what Maria does for a living. The story is called Future Tense. It's actually good that you're a foreign national, Donnacha said. He leaned back in his chair, hands behind his head, elbows splayed like wings, cock of the walk. Maria smiled down at him. The smile hurt her cheekbones. For what reason? She asked. The clients like it when the descriptions sound a bit broken Englishy. It's sexy, you know. But I'm Irish, Maria said. I'm from Galway. Donnacha snorted. Yeah, okay. He shuffled papers on his desk, and Maria dipped from foot to foot, weary of standing. Listen, when you're writing, think effervescent. Donnacha waggled his thick fingers. Think staccato, he said. His skin was the same mottled, churlish pink as a cow's udder. Maria wondered if it smelt of milk and dung. He swung in his chair and pulled himself to stand, his belly pouching forward, slack. Welcome aboard, Maria, yeah? He said. She hoped he wouldn't try to shake her hand. His bovine fingers would be too much altogether. She nodded at Donnacha, lifted the basket of perfumes from his desk and carried it out of his office to her own. She sat and picked out a grenade-shaped bottle. She imagined throwing it at Donnacha's temple and the nice thwack it would make as it hit flesh. Maria conjured the rainbow of bruises he would be left with, the welts and eventually the scabs. She twisted off the lid and sniffed deeply. Terroriste. Scent bomb your territories with this explosive cocktail of masculine cypress and wood lashed to feminine frangipani. Terroriste, for the woman who wants to be a man. Terroriste, forceful, fragrant, full on. The office was in a warehouse in an industrial estate on the Nace Road. Maria had taken her flat in Fairview so as to be near the city centre. She wanted the throb of it close by. Now, every weekday she went through the city on one bus and out past it on another, to a suburb on the far side. She left Dublin Bay at her back to enter the long grey corridor of the town. Maria wondered about all the lives that went on in the apartments on the quays and the houses in Inchicore and Bluebell. The sex, the sorrow, the shame that filled those rooms, under lights and in darkness 7 days a week. But some of the people must be happy, she thought. They were bound to be, weren't they? The buses she took chugged and stopped and chugged, and by the time she got off her last one for the day, it was late evening. The diesel smell of the buses reminded her of her father's New Holland, stinking up the boreen and the yard with its black fumes. Her mother called it that fucking yoke. Her family had always had massies like normal people. Maria would have to go west soon and show her face. She would have to endure her mother complaining about her father and weeping into her apron over a dead calf or a vanished hen. The same woman who never dropped a tear at her own son's funeral. Her story. Tonka bean and orange blossom vivify this homage to the female spirit. Childlike and luminous, her story's vibrant top notes slide sensually above an earthy heart and silky accord. Tough and seductive, her story is the new woman's fragrant manifesto. Wear it, own it, live it. Her story. Dublin city unfurled before Maria at the weekends. Her mother had proclaimed it a foul place, but Maria enjoyed the mix of oil and hops and exhaust stink. She liked the moss and mud smell of the Liffey that was like no river in Galway. The buildings were various. A pagoda of glass floated above the Liffey. There were the columns of government and soft red brick everywhere. Dublin's crowds energised Maria. She liked their push-me-pull, the endless spate of bodies and faces, everyone hurrying towards something and later in the day hurrying away from it. Dublin is awful depressing, Maria, her mother said. And you can never tell what's what or who's who. The place is wedged with gutties. Keep yourself to yourself. Maria liked the south side as much as the north side. She spent Saturday afternoons strolling up and down Grafton Street to watch the whole clatter of life it held. She loved the flower women with their rough faces, and the man who made a sand Labrador and stood over it all day, finessing the coat as if it were a real dog. Maria appreciated the buskers, the shy and the brazen, who tootled for the tourists on tin whistles and crooned in County America accents. She wondered if John had enjoyed the town when he lived in Dublin, or if London called to him from early on. Her brother had always wanted the next thing and the next. Nothing in the now ever satisfied him. John had worn a benign aftershave, remarkable only for its subtlety. Maria chose it for him, though she was only a girl at the time. "You can't wear Daddy's aftershave forever," she said, standing behind John on the cold lino of the bathroom, watching him douse himself from the sailing ship-adorned white flask that reminded Maria of a baby's bottle. "And what would you suggest, Missy?" he said. "We'd have to go into Ballinasloe so I could show you," Maria said. John drove her to the town in their mother's Fiesta, and he let 11-year-old Maria sniff her way through every men's fragrance in every chemist's shop in Ballinasloe, until she found the right one. The scent she chose was called Future Tense, and it came in a squat silver flagon. John had never heard of it, but when he sprayed it on, he told Maria it was the perfect one for him. He smelt his wrist and said, "As comforting and elemental as a new lover." Maria grinned. She loved the way John spoke, like someone making up a poem on the spot. She was happy to be seen walking Society Street and Dunlow Street with him, proud to be his sister. John paid for the aftershave, and they celebrated with tea and fairy cakes in the bread basket, and a breakneck spin back to a Haskra in the Fiesta. John overtook every other car on the road and roared, bog men," out the window as they sped by. On one of Maria's wandering Saturdays in Dublin, a man wearing Future Tense wafted past her, and she swooned under its warm, woody scent. It brought her brother to her like a swift slap. She followed the man for a while, soaking up his trail of cypress, tobacco, ginger, but she let him go once he crossed over into Stephen's Green. The moon was a yellow lantern rearing up behind the trees that rimmed the park. It was time for Maria to get back to Fairview and make her tea. Luna Bella. Unmask the urban emotion of Luna Bella. An unprecedented mix of patchouli, leather and moon iris. Let your soul hover above its sophisticated intensity and be swept away on its urgent ice lily base. Everyone deserves the indulgence that is Luna Bella. "Cheer up, it might never happen," the bus driver said. Maria stood at the front of the bus, waiting to get off. The driver looked at her in the rearview mirror. She wanted to say it already has happened, but that brought too clear a picture of John hanging in his London flat, his skin darkening as the days passed. So she smiled instead into the mirror before turning to look at the driver. He grinned back, showing 2 rows of bright, even teeth. Maria was always drawn to nice teeth. The bus pulled in at her stop and the driver opened the doors. Maria stepped forward to alight, but the driver closed the doors quickly before she could leave the bus. Maria turned to him again and he winked. He had choppy fair hair like a footballer's. The bus driver was taking her in, noticing her as much as she was him. "Ah, I'll stop messing now," he said, pressing the button to open the doors. "Go on, cheerio." Maria thanked him and swung off the bus into the Fairview dark, bringing a small piece of the driver home with her. She savoured him as she ate her tea of tinned salmon and batch loaf. She sipped him up with her coffee. Later, in bed, his golden hair lay beside her on the pillow, smelling of sunflowers and honey and cognac, and Maria rubbed herself into ecstasy on his scent. I forgot to say at the start I was just going to read an extract. So that's the extract from Future Tense, which is from Galway Stories 2020 from their press. The story is also in my collection from New Island, Joyride to Jupiter. Thanks very much, and I look forward to seeing all the other participants in the Oranmore Arts Festival.
So that's it, folks. All that's left now is to thank the writers for their contributions. It's not natural, this new reality, and I know that some writers relish the audience reaction as the listeners follow the twists and turns that they've put into their stories. They know a certain line will cause a ripple of laughter or a sharp intake of breath. However, when you're reading it to yourself into a laptop or a phone, there's no way to replicate the real thing. A writer guiding us through the story, word by word. I'd also like to thank Sharon O'Grady, the County Arts Officer, who has been a great supporter of Oranmore Arts Festival, and specifically of the development of this literary lunch event as part of our festival. And lastly, I'd like to thank Leonie and Cian and Heather from Oranmore Castle itself, who have been great supporters of the Oranmore Arts Festival each year as it grows. I hope you enjoy the rest of the festival.